Welcome to the Sounds Like This podcast. I'm Julie Murray, and today I am joined by Jo Harris.
Hello.
Welcome, Jo. Jo is a kindergarten teacher, long-time kindergarten teacher, play advocate, all-round excellent human, mother of cat and seaside dweller.
I am all of those things.
Thank you so much for joining me again, Jo.
Thanks for having me.
I'm delighted to have you here. So today, with your incredible expertise, I was hoping we could have a bit of a chat about play and its role in terms of brain development. I thought I might call this particular episode of the podcast Brains, Play and Courage.
I love it.
Yeah?
I love it. It's fabulous. It says what it does what it says.
I hope so. I really hope so. So let's have a chat about the cognitive development and what that looks like for children, why that's really important while they're children. I know from my previous training, I'm a big brain nerd in terms of the way music impacts the brain, but play is a huge impactor of the brain during those early years. So, yeah. Can you shed some light on that for me?
I'll do my best. That brain, I need to call up those skills right now. So the fascinating thing about the brain is that we don't mature until we're at least in our 20s. That brain is continuing to grow and prune and grow and prune all that time. It's quite extraordinary. And then when we think of times when we look at children's behaviour up close and maybe can't understand it, it's like if you thought about what that brain is doing and how it's constructed, how it connects to everything else, it starts to make a little more sense. But brain development and why it's so important in play is it's the repetitions through play that help the learning, that really shoots that learning forward. So there's taking in a piece of information and hearing it and absorbing it, but the play is actually kind of matching up head and heart, if you like. So it's a way of, instead of just being, there's nothing like experiencing something for yourself. You can be told, but when you're doing it, when you're feeling it and experiencing it, that makes for a very happy brain.
Yeah, and solidifies that information and that experience as well, and I guess gives context to that information when they experience it themselves.
Context is everything.
Yeah, absolutely, because otherwise how are you going to how are you going to access those pathways in the future if you don't have a good filing system from context?
Exactly. So it's been said that nothing fires the brain like play. Nothing lights it up in any other way, which is fascinating. So, and, right now in Melbourne it's tennis season and you see what people are drawn to, the contest. Yes, they're playing a game with skill that they've rehearsed many millions of times in their whole career, but people are, just so drawn to it, to watch that play in action, the strategy, the technique. And I think it just came to my mind. It's just such a great metaphor for what's happening, putting all those skills, and that brain knows what to do. It knows how to behave. There's a system that's quietly humming away and keeping you breathing and that blood pumping. But it's fascinating when you think of it. The magnitude of what it's actually doing, keeping you alive and kicking, so to speak.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. So in terms of what kids can get out of play, what are some of the big picture benefits that we would be, perhaps overlooking when it comes to play in terms of what do we want these children, what do we want these children, what do we hope that these children's brains will develop and benefit from in terms of play?
So if I can answer as a teacher, speaking perhaps on behalf of parents and their expectations, hopes and wishes, ultimately I think when we look at what we want children, I used it as well.
I know, it feels wrong, doesn't it? You have to do the thing for me.
I think when you think people feel like I want my child to be, some of the goals are I want my child to be happy. I want my child to have friends. I want my child to be able to read, write, and do arithmetic. It depends on what age you're living in. But all of those things aren't possible if you can't make connections. If you're not exercising that muscle, so to speak.
Yeah.
So play benefits. It's the understanding and relationships of how things work and how we work in the grander scheme of life. So what's my role? Who am I in this world? And how do I relate to everything around it? So if for any of those long-term goals to happen, we need to be able to make connections and associations. So the cognitive piece is really important. Many listeners might be familiar with good old Piaget, who was just kind of mucking about with his nieces and nephews. But there are whole examples of understanding the object permanence. So things that really exist, actually being able to understand that that's a glass and water gets in there, and there's a whole sequence of events that happen. So with play requires repetition and firing the neurons inside. So to be able to do any of the long-term goals, we've got to be able to do the short ones.
Yeah. Yeah, and not overlook them either, and you can't rush it. You can't get to those bigger levels of processing and problem solving if they don't understand that smaller stuff first.
For sure.
And there's no timeline really for kids to do that. There's their timeline, and there's a progression. There's a logical progression of things being more simple and then more complex in terms of their understanding of the world, but they need to discover that for themselves.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because if it's put upon you, it doesn't always have the same resonance. And if you can't, it's just such a personal experience. Life is such a personal experience. We're all on our own scale.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. So let's touch on what play in more structured settings could look like, maybe within teams, versus outside of more structured settings. So we talk about, how old should my child be when they do X, Y, Z, when they learn to play an instrument, when they join a footy team, when they do whatever. And I always say to families and educators, it really depends on the child. I've met 7-year-olds that are absolutely ready to play piano. I've met 10-year-olds that are not. Step one, we're sitting on a chair.
Wow.
And you know what? Some of those kids, they should not be sitting on a chair. They should be moving and flipping and climbing and jumping and all of that sort of stuff. So
I don't know how much Elton sits on his chair.
No, and Ben Folds. Oh, he sits on sits-ish, half a bum cheek.
Hovers.
Hovers. He must have thighs of steel. On a drum stool, so that he's got greater flexibility and movability. Anyway, I don't think Elton sits much too. Oh, maybe these. Anyway. But what are the benefits for structured play versus not so structured play and teamwork?
Mm-hmm. Probably the easiest way, certainly in my experience, is I use the example of children reading and writing.
Mm-hmm.
For some people, that is the benchmark of success. And they are incredibly important skills. There's no underestimating that. But much like you just mentioned, it all comes down to space and time. So the idea of I often had conversations with parents who were anxious, and I wanted to support them, but also wanted to let them know there isn't really a timeline. It will all happen, but certain things have to get into place. So we talked about, whether a child feels comfortable to sit or stand when they play. Same when it comes down to that formal learning. So there's the idea that real learning happens at primary school.
Real learning.
Which is
measurable, reportable, box tickable.
Yes, all of those things. But play makes it different because we move away from the timeline. We look at the milestones and we look at the skills required. And although there is some box ticking in early childhood, they've given away with most of that, but not all of it, because we do want to have some sort of marker what might be happening. So I will use an example for that I've come across with things like risky play and using tools. I know how many conversations people have had frightened with children handling real tools. And I said, yeah, but I wouldn't give someone a saw before I was confident they could cut with scissors. So, and
that seems very logical,
yes,
but unless you
when you take the
out,
steps, when you actually look at it has to be shown. I think that's, well, I'm also a visual kinesthetic learner, so that makes sense to me. But when you see what comes, where the child's at, what could be expected next, what's the outcome, it's all the steps along the way. So structured play is important to get the setup, but the free play is allowing that children that chance to explore and experiment.
Yeah.
Which is you don't get in more formalised learning because there's kind of an idea that you've got to be there.
Yeah.
And you just keep moving forward. Whereas in early childhood, you might sit at one stage for as long as you need.
Yes.
It's like the schemas that we talk about. There's a posting and the banging and the filling and emptying.
Absolutely.
They all serve their own purpose. It just, if you don't know what you're looking at, that's harder to see.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, play is sometimes seen as frivolous, but if it's explained to you, it's much easier to understand how valuable it is.
Absolutely. I know I see it in my settings, and I actually had a conversation really very recently with a parent, and they were saying, you know, how do I know when they're ready to do the next bit? And I was talking about those milestones that I need to see before a child is ready to put their hands on like a formal instrument to do it. And it seems like simple stuff, but you can't walk to the beat or dance to the beat before you can tap to the beat. The easiest place to keep a beat is on your lap, and then it's harder on your hands, and it's harder when we cross that midline of your body. It's harder when we have locomotion involved. There's a lot of, you know, weight transference, perceiving where the beat's going to go, where it's going to fall before the foot needs to lift up for it to land on the beat. There's so many things that go into that, and a child will be so much more successful on an instrument if they have spent a lot of time dancing and playing and moving their body and exploring space and navigating and all of that sort of stuff, and then developing those skills to put their feet on the beat than they will playing a piano. You could drill that student, but they won't get there faster, and they will have not as much fun. And I think the fun cannot be understated in terms of its importance, because it's the fun and the knowing that it can be fun to create and do it for yourself that I think helps them get through and develop that grit when it's really hard later. You know, it's frustrating to do a new thing, and I think adults forget that too, that learning to do new things is hard.
It is really hard.
We expect kids to do it all the time. Yep. We put them in new situations and expect them to just
But the temptation can be to do it for them.
Yes, because faster, right?
Yeah. Right. So if we practice harder between Julie's music sessions.
No.
And it's like, because it's not enjoyable.
No, it
becomes
has to be
a chore.
Joy. Yeah, absolutely.
That's one thing about play. There's the element of, in early childhood, it's those expectations that people have, but then they're kind of overshadowed by disappointment and judgment and those sorts of things. It's like it isn't actually a race, but you can also see people's anxiety is that I don't want my child to be left behind.
Yes, and that sentence, left behind, I hear, you know, exercise.
They're not
very
achieving.
Young children. They're not achieving whatever an adult has outlined for them.
Yep.
And the way they're performing, in inverted commas, looks different to a different child. And it always will, because they are all different people. And it's a really tricky thing for me. It causes lots of friction, because I feel like the more we just throw those timelines out the window and allow that child to be completely childlike and unwrapping their gifts in that moment, the better their experience will be.
Yeah.
And the more they will form those connections for themselves, the better their understanding of their world is. And I think by rushing a child to get to the next milestone for our benefit is mislaid.
Sometimes it's just, I think some people, this is very generally speaking, don't know how to, it might feel like a void, or there's something that they might have their own expectations. There have been studies about people finding it just awkward to know how to play with a child.
I see that.
And they're finding, I have to have a skill or a teacher will know or an instructor. It's like, no, it's about the relationship.
Yes.
And it's a dance.
It's really interesting, actually. I can't remember the exact figures on it, but there's direct correlation from what I was reading between connection and safe sense of security and resting in love, and that child knowing that they are safe and secure. You know, you've got that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and security and safety it's pretty fundamental.
Yes.
And
can't do anything without it.
Nothing at all, because your amygdala is in charge if there's none of that, and we don't want amygdalas in charge. They're great for keeping you safe, but not great for managing everyday life. So, so in terms of building that connection and having the children feel valued and seen and heard and important, and I think that can't really be overstated in terms of what we need first. And I know that as a teacher, you know, if I have a new family come and see me, and it takes a little while for that child to trust me. It takes a little while for those parents to trust me, or those educators I'm working with to trust me, as it should. And I have to earn that trust. And it's about building those respectful relationships. And I think that takes time. So, yeah. And
it's those positive interactions that are helping with all of that deep-seated learning, the confidence to learn, the confidence to try and make errors and have a laugh at yourself. And there's so much embedded in it. Absolutely.
We have a little saying here. It's go, I made a mistake because I'm a human person.
Oh,
and
fabulous.
I think it's really good to normalise
resilience building.
Yeah, yes. We make mistakes. Yes. Everybody makes mistakes. I've been a musician for decades. I make mistakes every day.
And most of the time people never notice.
Yeah, probably not. And if I was performing, I wouldn't draw their attention to it because that's part of the craft. But I think normalising it in an educative space, that we make mistakes and we can have another go and it's no big deal.
It's important that vulnerability is coming. It's so much more spoken about than I think it ever was.
That's great.
And it allows a lot of breakdown of stereotypes and sometimes misguided information. But it's also understanding that, you know, like I said earlier, it's really understanding why people feel anxious in the way they do. They're just wanting the best.
Yeah,
their
absolutely.
idea of what the best is.
Absolutely. So. I wonder how much of either parents or educators' choices come from being uncomfortable in sitting in that discomfort. You know, I feel like we're so immediately gratified by technology as adults. You know, we say, or we hope that a child be able to regulate themselves, but we regulate ourselves by scrolling endlessly. And, you know, we do all of these things to cope with overwhelming worlds and don't necessarily model the best behaviour for our children, but also don't necessarily have those strategies ourselves to be able to sit with a little bit of uncomfortable.
Yes.
You know, and if we don't know how to play, we immediately want to fix something or jump in knowing the right thing to do. Yeah. But sometimes we need to just be, and that can be uncomfortable.
Yes. I think it's those old attitudes to play because everything was so buttoned up and so serious. It's taking a long time to unpack that and say there is that value in making a mistake. Sometimes it's the best learning is from something that went wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think your silliness is your superpower in that. We at home we say, "I love your weird," and so I know I kind of feel like no matter what kind of human you are, you're going to be a weird one, and so celebrating,
bring on the weird.
Yeah, what makes you weird makes you awesome, and like I love your weird, whatever makes you uniquely you and weird.
I like that.
Yeah.
I'm going to borrow that.
Yeah, do it. Spread it around. Sprinkle it like confetti, glitter, the herpes of the stationery world. So a big thank you to you, Jo, for joining me today. That's about all the time we have for today's episode. I really appreciate your expertise and hearing your insights on how play has evolved and changed over time and your experiences with that. Thank you.
Thank you. It's just something I love to talk about. So anytime.
Yeah, well, I might hold you to that. If you're interested in learning more about musical play or play in general, feel free to head over to the Sounds Like This blog at soundslikethis.com.au. Thanks so much, Jo. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.